Hello friends, we are live. Welcome to another episode of Learn with Flo. Happy Monday, start to a new week, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys to continue on our conversations here all around health technology and the worlds of really being able to unite together our health technology and our body's own very smart and innate healing capacity, right? So if you were with us last week, we really were able to talk about uniting this dynamic duo of things that we find from a health technology standpoint into the world of really putting our hormone health in our own hands. And I think there's so much valuable data and insights from these devices that a lot of people don't even really know how to navigate or use. And it's right there on our wrist or it's right there in our arm. There's lots of different things that people are using these days that are constantly collecting this really valuable health information on them. And then we don't even know all the way always how to use it, right? So from watches to rings to armbands, there's tools of all kinds that really hold so much power and data, and we aren't even really using it well to clue us into early signs of dysfunction or patterns and things that we can identify before it really even becomes a chronic disease, or even things and trends before they really show up on lab work, which is what we'll talk about today as well too. So again, if you were with us last week, we really dove into this world of health technology and all of the different trends that it can help us see and establish. So in real time, if we know how to use things like wearable devices, we can actually see trends in training adaptations or fitness adaptations. We can see trends in things like sleep and recovery metrics. We can see the honest being the key word there, the honest impact of stress and total body stress, not just coming from mental, emotional, but physical stress coming from things like blood sugar dysregulation, circadian rhythm imbalance, high cortisol, adrenal dysfunction, low progesterone, estrogen dominance, right? It's all of these physical body stressors that are happening inside of us every day. I don't think a lot of people really think about those being stress, right? We only think about and account for mental and emotional stress that happens as part of our day-to-day life, which is true. And that goes into the bucket too. That's why I say an honest evaluation of stress. But that's another trend that we're able to see on wearable devices and health technology, as well as a more of a deep dive into the inner workings of our overall hormone health as well too. And although, like I said, many of us are walking around with a lot of these different devices on our bodies every day, more often than not, most of us aren't even really using them to their fullest capacity or to their fullest potential. And I think that there's really powerful and, dare I say, even life-changing communication that's happening from our body, that is, if we know how to listen to it, right? So I think that there's so many trends that are kind of happening in this world of, like I said, health technology and different things that people are getting into, that I'm really passionate about helping people realize all of the different stuff that's being collected on their body, all of the different data, and help you put your hormones and your health back into your hands. And this is something you guys will hear me talk about a lot, but I have a very deep passion, very deep reverence for the ability of us to source our own healing. And I say healing in whatever route you're on, whether it's an emotional, a spiritual, a mental, a physical healing journey. And a lot of times all of those tend to manifest together at the same time, which is really powerful stuff. But we live in a world now where we are so conditioned and so taught to look outside of ourselves, right? To constantly outsource our healing to a supplement, a medication, a drug, a doctor, a specialist, right? And we're running out, really trying to desperately grab onto things outside of ourselves, even a diet, right? It's a diet, a doctor, a specialist, a medication, a supplement. Everything that we try to reach for is outside of ourselves. And it feels very frantic, very kind of nervous, anxious energy, right? Because we're desperately kind of trying to grab onto these things outside of ourselves, when really, if we really take a second, pause, listen to a lot of the cues that are coming in from our body and learn how to decode them, because our body doesn't speak in English language, right? It's not usually coming to us and being like, excuse me, I'm experiencing some low progesterone, right? It's going to speak to you in terms of symptoms, right? That's how the body communicates with us. And so we need to learn how to take those symptoms and be like, aha, I know what this means. I know what my body is trying to tell me because, I felt some night sweats last week. My appetite's been really dysregulated. I felt way more anxious. I had some spotting this cycle. My body is really telling me that there's some low progesterone going on, right? That's the type of information that I want you to feel empowered with, because that is way more data than even any routine lab panel will ever give on you, because that's your true lived experience. We're seeing this in real time, right? So we don't necessarily need a lab to tell us like, you have low progesterone. It's like your body's communicating to us like, you have low progesterone, like let's do something about it. Why do we have low progesterone? What are the sources of low progesterone? What's driving our progesterone down, right? All of those types of things. And I think to really kind of sum it all up before we get into some of the details of this hormone health component that we can use with health technology today, I think my most favorite quote comes from Hippocrates himself, who says the greatest medicine of all is teaching people how to not need it, right? And that's really what I feel like a big portion of my role is, and where I've really developed my philosophy and my teachings around, is helping people learn how to listen to the communication of their body, how to access their own innate healing intuition in that, and to learn how to use a lot of these things like non-pharmaceutical strategies. How do we use nutrition, lifestyle, hormone balance, mind-body medicine? How do we use these things to really access that on the other side? So specifically to talking to my ladies out there, there's really no other demographic that's probably more in need of this type of daily data than us as females, right? And that's because I hear every single day in private practice, I hear those frustrating stories of women that are attempting to navigate more of what we might call like the traditional medicine model, or more of the conventional medicine model, with their chronic symptoms, with their period problems, with their infertility struggles, only to be met with statements like, oh, all your labs look normal, but I can write you a prescription for birth control and just kind of make some of those cycle symptoms go away, right? Or it seems like you're under a lot of stress, and I think it's just anxiety. Here's a medication for that, right? Or hearing things like, I've heard this before too, some women just have heavy periods and migraines. It's genetic. There's really nothing you can do about it, right? Or the classic like, oh, there's no point. We don't really test your hormones, or there's really no point in testing your hormones because they fluctuate all the time and it's just too complicated. It won't tell us anything, right? And really, I hear all of those statements, and what it really should say is, I don't know why you're feeling the way that you are, and because my training, and this is coming from like a conventional medicine practitioner, right, that would be saying something like this, what they really should be saying in those statements is, I don't really know why you're feeling this way, and the way that my toolbox works and my training works I'm not really designed to get to the root cause of your symptoms, and I'm not really well-versed in how to train your body from a holistic perspective. But I know someone who is, and I know someone who can use those types of modalities if that's what you're more interested in, right? Hi, it's me, that's person. But I think individuals just keep feeling defeated and frustrated, invalidated, and just honestly downright dismissed because they're using, like I said, more of the conventional medicine system for something it was never designed for. It was never designed to deal with chronic illness and chronic disease that has been created by lifestyle, nutrition, nervous system regulation, circadian rhythm problems, sleep, right? It's like that system wasn't designed to help with that. It was designed for more like emergent care, acute, like life-threatening type situations. So we're just using that model for something it was never designed to help with. And then we feel frustrated when we don't get the answers from that model. I'm like, that's because you're like the definition of insanity. You're just keep using the same model over and over again and expecting different results, thinking like, oh, I just need to get to a different practitioner. I'm like, no, your practitioner is not determining your care. Your insurance company is determining your care. If you just keep going to like in-network providers, hoping that the next in-network provider is going to magically be able to help you with like nutrition and lifestyle and supplemental ways to manage your hormone symptoms, you're not going to find it, right? Because the insurance model is going to be dictating that, not the provider, right? Aha moment for a lot of people there. But little do women know that you have the best access to lab testing and body data right from any wearable devices that you might have and use. And I don't even think that it's absolutely necessary that you have or use something. I just want you to know, like, hey, if you already have some of these like watches and wearables and some of these devices, like there's probably some really powerful data in there that you don't even know that you have, right at your fingertips, that can tell you a lot more about how your body and your health and your hormones are working than maybe even any routine lab draws might, right? So instead of getting frustrated and continuing to go down the same route and getting the same result over and over again, let's try something different, right? So if you are interested in, like I said, using a little bit more of some of this like wearable technology or kind of wearable data to your advantage, I think the most valuable data metrics to get an insider view of like female health and hormones, right, is going to be things like basal body temperature. So if you're looking for a device or kind of looking to get into this world of like understanding cycle syncing, understanding things like progesterone, estrogen, fluctuations throughout the cycle, that's where basal body temperature can be really beneficial and helpful. If you are like a fully menopausal female and you know that you are no longer getting menstrual cycles at all, or even ovulating at all, that's where maybe the basal body temperature trend isn't quite as important because you don't feel like you have that definitive ovulation or things like that you're tracking. Totally fine. But if you are still in like active reproductive years or in that perimenopausal transition, even if you've had a partial hysterectomy where your uterus is gone but your ovaries are still there, you very much could still be in like an active ovulation cycle. Chances are it's not consistent because you're not getting that full-on message, but these basal body temperature trends can still be very helpful in those situations for sure. So arguably the most important metric that you may or may not be tracking would be the basal body temperature. It does unlock an insider view of timing of ovulation, fertile windows, predicting menstrual cycles, identifying hormone imbalances like low progesterone, estrogen dominance. Like we can see these things by tracking body temperature trends over time, which is super cool. So I do think having a device that tracks basal body temperature is really helpful. Things like an Oura Ring can do that. I'm not sure about a Whoop. The last I checked, the Whoop doesn't do that. But that's where I think something that tracks that is very helpful and beneficial. The second thing you're going to kind of clue into is heart rate variability, or HRV trends. This one is pretty universal across all devices are measuring things like HRV. It's one of the only objective markers that we can use to firsthand see your body's perception of how much stress it is under. So HRV, whether it's going to pick up all stress, it's going to pick up physical stress, like we mentioned, blood sugar dysregulation, dysbiosis, inflammation. It's going to pick up mental and emotional stress, like family, kids, finances, boundaries, people pleasing, trauma. And there's really no hiding from HRV readings. There's just not. And that's why I love it so much, because we can see how the body actually works, which is going to be a collective view of all of the stress that goes into one common bucket. And it allows us to really ensure that we're taking that into account and we're taking kind of a good level of responsibility and ownership over that very real barrier to health change for some people, which is that overall stress bucket. And then the last thing that I think from a data metric standpoint, which is helpful, is something that's measuring or tracking sleep and recovery scores, specifically around deep sleep and getting that like deep restorative sleep. Sometimes it's not always enough to just be like, oh, I'm getting 8 hours of sleep a night. It's like, great. How much of that is actually happening in more of our like deep restorative detoxification kind of sleep? That's where our body secretes the most growth hormone. That's where we're going to get the most testosterone release, even as females. And those are the types of things that are really going to dictate like how the body feels on a daily basis as well too. So it really helps us like learn how to take our own empowered health into our own hands versus just blindly outsourcing it, like I said, to other people, other programs, other protocols. It's like, no, you have this, like you have this at your fingertips and you can actually see this in real time. And then maybe you're taking that data and taking that finding into more of your healthcare practitioner practice to be a better advocate for yourself over what types of tests you do want to run or what types of strategies you do want to start to explore as well too. So once we're kind of tracking some of this data, this is where it gets fun. What types of trends are we looking for? If we are tracking things like basal body temperature, or we are tracking things like sleep or heart rate variability, what are some trends that we as females want to be looking for, and what can it start to tell us about our body in a little bit more deeper fashion? So number one, what I would love for anyone to do if they're still of this age and of this demographic, start to use your data to get to know your menstrual cycle. Every female is different, right? And I know that we have kind of the classic textbook definition of like a 28-day menstrual cycle, and everybody ovulates on day 14, and your fertile window is between day 14 and 17, right? It's like, cute. That's awesome. We can kind of throw some of those like blind recommendations out on paper, but I'll tell you, once you start tracking things like basal body temperature trends, you could have a perfect 28-day cycle and not ovulate on day 14. I know that's me, right? I usually have somewhere between a 28 and 29 day menstrual cycle. I do not ovulate on day 14. Usually is closer to day 16 or 17, right? So it's like, if I didn't know that, then I can plan all of these things around like a day 14 ovulation when that's not really true to me, right? So get to know your menstrual cycle. Anywhere from, I would say, like a 26 to a 32 day cycle is still considered normal. Anything shorter than 26 days, you're like a 22-day cycle, or you're having a period like every 19 or 20 days, first thing you should be thinking about is low progesterone, for sure. Usually that's kind of where women maybe see the start of like a perimenopause kind of transition, is when those cycles start to get closer together and they start happening like every 3 weeks. That's kind of a telltale sign of low progesterone. Also, like I said, it's really important to kind of start to track some of these basal body temperature trends and get to know your cycle, because it's important if you want to use these types of trends to help conceive, or if you want to avoid or prevent pregnancy. Works both ways. Ovulation is going to be indicated by the rise in basal body temperature, right? So we usually ovulate, and then about 24 hours later, our basal body temperatures are going to start to rise. So if you're trying to judge the rise based off of like conception or fertile window, you already missed it, right? So once your basal body temperatures start to rise, you've already ovulated, your fertile window is already gone, right? So you can use that to start to judge and track like, okay, when do I ovulate, and where do we want to kind of time that or protect that in terms of understanding ovulation. There's other tools like ovulation predictor kits. They work great in theory, but honestly, they're usually very poor for women, especially if you have hormonal imbalances, like something like... Sorry, I dropped my phone. Something like a PCOS. That was embarrassing. Those ovulation predictor kits usually don't always work like the best. So they can be kind of, like I said, inconsistent at best. Not every female also will bleed for exactly, like I said, 5 to 7 days. Some will be shorter, some will be longer. That can kind of be some signs of key imbalances. When all you ever know are your cycles, then it can be difficult to know in reality what is normal versus what's not normal. So I'm just here to tell you, get to know your menstrual cycle first and foremost. Just take a couple months to kind of start to see like, what's my average cycle length? What's my average ovulation day? How many days do I see a rise in basal body temperature trends? Because I don't want you to ever feel gaslit into thinking that anything that you experience that you're uncomfortable with is normal or like how it should be, right? It's like, oh, well, everybody that I know has 36-day cycles and they never know when their cycle is going to come. It's like, okay, but that doesn't mean that's like normal or optimal just because it's common, right? So get to know your menstrual cycle, and then we can start to determine what is within normal range, healthy range, and what might be some signs and communications from your body that things are a little bit wonky or a little bit haywire. So once you get to know your cycle, then step 2 is starting to learn how to identify the difference between your follicular phase and your luteal phase, right? I like to split the menstrual cycle into 2 because it's just way easier that way. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about a 4-stage menstrual cycle. Well, they'll throw in like the days that you bleed and the day that you ovulate. Those are so short in comparison that it's usually just easier to say we're either in follicular phase or we're in the luteal phase. Like before ovulation or after ovulation is kind of the key differentiating factor there, because that's going to determine also how we might change our nutrition or how we might change our exercise, how we might change supplementation or lifestyle based off of where we're at in our overall menstrual cycle too. So follicular phase, getting to know that, is going to be the first day that you bleed all the way until you ovulate. So like I said, for someone that maybe doesn't ovulate until day 16 or 17, your follicular phase might be from day 1 to day 16. Perfectly normal. That's where you're going to have more of those lower body temperature trends. They're going to stay pretty flatlined, right? Then once you ovulate, so ovulation day all the way to the first day of your next bleed, that's when we're going to see a rise in basal body temperature trends if you're wearing some type of wearable device that's tracking that. And that's what we call your luteal phase. That rise in basal body temperature is due to progesterone. So we can see so many things when we start to track things like basal body temperature trends, heart rate variability. And we're going to start to, now that we like know our menstrual cycle, we also know the difference between like our follicular and our luteal phase. Now, all of a sudden, we have so much data at our fingertips, and we can start to really get like linear and granular about what we're experiencing. So for example, if a female comes to me and they're saying, I struggle with migraines, I struggle with headaches, my first question is always, does that happen during a consistent time of your cycle? And they're like, I've never tracked that before. That's very key, right? Because if it's happening more follicular phase, or like right when you're bleeding, that might clue us into things more like mineral status, iron status, vitamin nutrient deficiencies. Or if it's more luteal phase, then that may clue us in completely different, right? It may clue us into what's our adrenal health doing? What about things like cortisol imbalance? What's HRV readings doing, right? So it can kind of tell us a little bit more of like, what time of the month is it happening in? And therefore we know what to do about it, right? It's like, if you're learning the language of your body essentially, and you're like, man, I'm noticing a pattern. I'm getting luteal phase headaches or luteal phase migraines. And you're like, I know what my body's telling me. It needs more adrenal support, right? You just became your own you sourced that information from within you, and you're like, I know what my adrenals really love. They really love sunshine. They really love vitamin C rich foods. They really love more stress management techniques, right? All of these different things that I coach to and I help you get specific on in my Cycle Syncing 101 module as part of my intuitive interpretation guide to wearable technology that I just launched. So if, like I said, I'm going to share some like high level examples, but if you want more details of exactly how to navigate the cycle syncing and trends to look for, you're going to want to go download that mini course. It's full of gems like this. So things like headaches and migraines can clue us off to certain things. Like I said earlier, maybe you get spotting during a certain time of the month. Maybe you feel more anxious or you feel more restless during certain times of the month. Again, that can kind of clue us off. Maybe there's some progesterone deficiencies going on. Or maybe you get worsening skin breakouts or acne during certain times of your cycle. Classic sign of maybe some estrogen issues, estrogen detoxification. Maybe we need some liver support. If we're seeing shortened shortened cycle windows versus lengthened cycle windows, you're like, I'm getting a period every 22 days, or it's been 38 days since my last cycle and I don't know when it's coming again, right? All of these different things can really clue us off to what's going on underneath the surface. And when you start to learn that the body communicates through these symptoms, now you feel more in the driver's seat and you have your hormones in your hands versus like, I'm experiencing all of these symptoms. I'm feeling very nervous and anxious about it because I don't know what's going on with my body. We run to kind of like outsource that to someone in a well-meaning position that doesn't necessarily have the tools and resources to navigate that with you. And then you end up walking away with a prescription medication that you never asked for, right? And it's like, I know it's so frustrating. Or you end up going in and be like, I really think something's wrong and wonky with my hormones. And they run labs and everything comes back normal. It's like, that's because like those routine labs aren't gonna catch the types of noticing symptoms and data that you're getting from your own body, right? So just know that there's so many different things that we can kind of cross-reference here to really put our hormone health back in our hands. And once you kind of start to realize some of these trends that you're noticing, whether it's spotting or cycle changes or skin breakouts or bloating changes, migraines, sleep disturbances, anxiety, and you're starting to get a clue. You're like, oh yeah, this is happening at certain phases of my cycle. What is that telling me with my body? Now we can start to put some parameters in place to actually reverse it, right? We don't need to run to outsource our healing to everyone and everything else. We just need to learn, okay, the power of using food, the power of using certain nutritional strategies or lifestyle interventions, maybe even supplement routines, or maybe there is some additional testing that can be really helpful to help correct any of these imbalances at their source, is really what we're going after here. So ladies, you're not designed to eat the same, live the same, 24/7, 365 like a man is kind of designed, right? They're designed a little bit more with this like 24-hour time clock. Women, we have more of a 28-day infradian rhythm. So if you're trying to like eat the same macros every day, sleep exactly the same every day, and expect that that's going to be something supportive for hormone health, it's not, right? You're going to have to learn how to cycle sync these aspects of your life, because we have estrogen that we really need to support and nourish during a follicular phase, and then we have progesterone to really think about during more of a luteal phase. And if we try to just like shut that shit down and just flatline ourselves like a dude, of course we're going to have problems, right? Of course, like it just makes sense. So it's not necessarily, like I said, surprising, but if we don't learn how to, like I said, work in concert with a lot of these hormones, and it's not wildly different, it's really not that difficult, but making some of these small and very intentional tweaks when we start to learn more of this hormone health and put it in our hands, it's like, wow, I made some really simple tweaks and like I feel drastically different. My periods are so much better. My cycles are so much more consistent. My mood feels better. My body composition feels better. It's like all of these things that we like desperately try to outsource and like overwork and over struggle to achieve, when in reality it probably just tells us we're working out of alignment with something that's innate to our own body. So we'll experience the same vicious cycle of symptoms really forever if we don't learn how to navigate some of that. Forever chasing the Band-Aid solutions out there, more medications, more doctors, more specialists for something that you have pretty complete autonomy over in this situation, or at least a very high baseline level of it. So like I said, I'm very passionate about this stuff. I love teaching about this. If you're more curious about learning a lot into, like I said, this cycle syncing 101, learning how to even use things like wearable devices. It doesn't have to be the fanciest of fancy, but you're like, oh yeah, I have something that tracks HRV or my sleep or basal body temperature trends. You can really start to learn how to hone in on this and identify where those phases start and end for you. So if you're curious about this, you would be a fantastic candidate for my intuitive interpretation mini course, all things wearable technology, and it has that bonus cycle syncing guide in there and module as well too. So you can use the code all the way through the end of October. You can use the code LAUNCH in all caps, LAUNCH, launch 24. Launch 24 will get you 50% off of that bad boy through the end of October. So don't miss out on that great deal. Dive into the mini course that has so much great stuff for you. And I'm excited to, like I said, hear what you guys are learning about your cycle as you dig in deeper. So we'll catch you guys next Monday. But in the meantime, be sure to download your intuitive interpretation mini course, and I'll be anxious to hear you guys' comments.